Half-Life Alyx never truly wowed me back in 2020 because Boneworks already had its hooks in me. While clearly lower budget and wobbly in places, I fell in love with this simulationist approach to VR. Physics-driven avatars bouncing around on 3D legs, everything with weight and heft and no invisible walls to stop me from clambering out into the sparsely textured corners of the simulation. It was the kind of VR magic I dreamt of as a kid. Bonelab, part sequel, part creator's sandbox, expands on an experimental, hell or high water design that I want out of VR. It's not an experience I can recommend to newcomers, but despite some rough edges, it's one of the most consistently exciting experiences I've had in years. Where Boneworks was more of a traditional, story-driven action game, Bonelab takes that core and reworks it into something similar to Garry's Mod for VR, interwoven with a 5 to 6 hour story mode. Set in a strange, alternate 90s akin to a more haunted version of Hypno Space Outlaw, where VR took off early. The story has you breaking out of a conservative, corporate-run metaverse to become a hacker and modder by way of the usual VR FPS antics. While not painfully realistic in their handling, guns feel satisfying, with you popping in a magazine, racking the slide, and rattling off rounds as recoil dynamically spoils your aim, unless you hold it steady using both hands. Thanks to better sound and effects, it feels punchier than shooting in Boneworks, although melee has seen the most improvement. For a game sold on its physics-based brawling, Boneworks never felt quite right to me. Weapons were too heavy, and my character was too weak. In Bonelab, I could swing a sword or a club with ease. Blunt attacks land with satisfying weight, while blades pierce and stick into virtual non-flesh, requiring some force to dislodge them.
Lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in.
Bare-handed fighting is better than ever, letting you properly grapple and brawl. No other game has let me convincingly grab an enemy, trip them, pin them to the ground, and headbutt them into submission. At a certain point of trying all the different game modes and going through the campaign, it feels like something's missing, and that something is kept under wraps until around halfway through the story. The body log. Much like how the gravity gun recontextualized Half-Life 2, this little arm-mounted device changes how you play Bonelab, letting you switch between physically driven avatars with appearance-based stats freely for the rest of the game. Replacing your generic starting body, there's 6 main avatars, and the effect they have on gameplay is enormous. Switching between bodies to solve problems is the focus of the final stretch of the story campaign, which has the highest concentration of physics puzzling, parkour, and combat. This late game segment also features the most variety in environments, leading to the idea that you're truly breaking out of a virtual world. Delving into this fragmented metaverse probably wouldn't have felt nearly as memorable for me if not for the expansive soundtrack. Airy synths are backed with brooding melodies and a surprising number of varied vocal tracks. 8 vocalists lend their talents, and it really cements Bonelab's aesthetic identity. Mechanical, strange, but with a surprising amount of soul. Those here for a story-driven experience might find themselves a little disappointed, but the game encourages players to treat everything past the credits as a personal playground. The real magic for me became apparent when bringing my avatar switching powers back to earlier maps. What once seemed purely linear is now clearly infested with secret areas and Easter eggs, most of them rewarding their discovery with permanently unlocked new tools, gadgets, or NPCs you can summon with the item spawner tool. While not early access, Bonelab is still a work in progress. Since launch, there have been multiple updates to the mod development tools, and a major update to the game to improve a handful of levels. Even within the game, there's hints at a whole B-side plot that doesn't exist at present. Developers Stress Level Zero have promised to work closely with players on the future of Bonelab, and it's anyone's guess where it'll end up. I'm just glad to be on the ground floor of such an experimental game, and curious as to how it'll change, or change VR entirely over the coming months. As a side note, the author of the original article gave this an 81. Me personally, I'd probably give this like a 90, maybe higher. Boneworks is one of my favorite VR games, and Bonelabs is even better than Boneworks, so what's not to love, honestly?